All right, so we have our community here. We've done educational stuff for them. You've been an important part of that on the fire safe part, and we've been trying to put our message out about fire safe stuff. So you've got a situation here where you've been following them, and you've been, you can see by the construction you do and how you arrange things, you've designed fire safety into your place, and that's what we're trying to get other people to do too.
Yeah, I guess it's very fascinating for me, someone who's been in fire for a career 61 years now, and I used to just read about this in books and help other people do it, and now I'm in a position where with a new cabin 3 or 4 years ago, I decided to build my cabin so it would be fire safe, and I had shale landscaping instead of bark mulch, and I put on a metal roof to keep the embers from burning a shake roof down when a fire comes, and I put my propane tank over 50 feet away from my place to keep it out of harm's way. And I guess I also put on a Trex deck, and naively I thought because Trex was not wood, it wouldn't burn, but then someone said, no, it does burn, it will ignite, but it takes unusual
That's right.
conditions.
You're not going to have to worry too much about that. The composite decking materials, they don't want to burn, and they have to have a lot of fire around them. So as long as you've created, like you say, the shale, you've interrupted that flow of fire. It can't get to there with any kind of energy that's going to cause that to burn. Now, if your house burns, sure, the composite decking will burn with it, but it probably won't get to that point. And you've cleared so much around here. The thinning here has been tremendous. Granted, you had to do it because of the beetle kill, but you're not going to get the ferocity of fire in here that normally you would have seen.
You're right. When I first bought this place, and that was back in 1975 from Earl Cooley, who made the first smoke jump in history back in 1940 and became a realtor. But I bought the property. This was a dense forest then, and it would have been very ripe for a crown fire. And now, I guess, thanks to the beetles, they've selected the trees that I cut down and then burned up the slash. So this forest now offers a very more manageable kind of fire behavior.
As a firefighter, as a fire officer, I would not have a problem with sending a crew in here to babysit this. You've done the work, and all they have to do is make sure that the little things that happen, little ember that falls on a little bit of litter near the house that starts a little bit of flame, they'll be here. But I feel good about leaving them here because they're not in danger. They can handle this. This is safe for them.
Yeah, you brought up a really interesting point. We used to call it defensible space, but after fires like Yarnell and others, we know that what it really permits for the firefighter is survivable space. That if the firefighter is here, that the space is actually survivable by a human being, in addition to providing a safe kind of fire behavior scenario where they can effectively fight fire.
And, I encourage, if people have the right mentality, if they've done the work on their property, I like them to stay on their property because I don't have enough fire crews for every house. I'd like them to stay on their property and just doing the walk around, making sure everything's okay. Yeah, it's going to be smoky, it might be hot, might be scary. But like here, it's not going to be very scary because you've already done the work. It's the whole thing. Prepare your property, and then either go early, really early,
Right.
or you just stay there and keep an eye on things. Because there are some things that you missed. So you take your little bucket and your mop and you swat that down, and you're good. And then you go inside for a cool drink of water and clean air, and then maybe 15 to 30 minutes later you come out and walk around again. I like that.
I tell you what I learned in 2012 when our district was threatened by the Mustang Fire, Alan, that 350,000 acre fire that came at us out of the Salmon River. And what I realized then, as I started looking around my property again in the middle of the fire season, you're never done preparing. It's a work in progress, and I did a little more weed whacking, and I looked up on my roof and realized even though it's a metal roof, there were a lot of pine needles up there, so I got the pine needles off the roof, and it's just the constant maintenance and upkeep kind of mentality to keep you out of harm's way.
It's really becomes a lifestyle. that
Yes.
You keep your place clean. You look after that stuff. And as a consequence, you live in a really nice place.
Yeah,
It's all
true. Yes, yeah. Yeah, the housekeeping for fire gives you a aesthetic surrounding for enjoying each day.
And I notice, this time of year we're all green. We're just past our wet flood season. Grasses are all greened up. In a month or two, they'll all start turning brown. You'll start seeing them, the red seed heads and all that. And then it becomes a fire issue. But if you can keep up on it, if you can be doing your weeding while the grass is green, you don't have to worry about anything. And it's a lot nicer to be cutting in because it's nice and cool out here. When it gets hot, when there's a fire threatening, when there's smoke in the air, that's not the best time to be doing it. You want to be doing it throughout the spring and the summer to keep on top of things.
Yeah, true. And keeping on top of things makes one realize, I guess, that it's just not an individual strategy, it's a community strategy. Because even though I might do all the right things here, if my neighbor upwind of me allows standing dead trees with needles all over the place for more embers, then I'm threatened even though I've done everything well here.
That's a great point, because you do have that issue with your neighbor. He has not taken care of his property. So yeah, you have to be more concerned with flying embers. So yeah, you don't have continuous fuels to your building. You've done really well with that, but you can't control the thing that's coming through the air, trying to lodge in some nasty little place and catch on fire. But because you've done the rest of the work, you can pay attention to that stuff. And if you're here, you'll be here to catch those things.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I think that's so important to tie everybody in the community together too, so that it's not only the strength of the individual, but the strength of all of the individuals working together.
Well, I know in our community we have people, their neighbors may not be there year round, but they're more than willing to walk over there and check on their property, even during a fire. And it happened, in fires of 2000, it happened a lot, I know. They're willing to kind of care for their neighbor if they're not there to do it themselves. So even if people evacuate, often you have that neighbor who's going to come over and say, "Oh, look at that," and they jump on this, little tiny fire that would have been a problem if somebody hadn't been watching it.
Yeah, true. Yeah, it's the little things that make a difference. And I have friends in Australia that have stayed and defended a house in the eucalyptus fires, and they often talk about defending their home with a mop bucket and a wet mop and going around inside the house, or sometimes embers go through a keyhole in the door that they didn't tape shut.
Low tech works really well.
Yeah.
I know with us, with the fire company, we have all kinds of different pumps and hose and nozzles and vehicles and all that stuff. Well, we have failures all the time. And so if a homeowner's depending on a powered pump system, I don't know.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it. It's not going to get used enough to be sure that it's going to work when they need it. So the bucket and the mop.
Yeah.
Having buckets of water just on the four
Scattered.
corners of your house so you always have access to it. It's quick.
Makes a difference.
That makes much more sense to me.
Yeah.
We have an obligation to provide for the best water quality that we can. And so any management within a watershed concerns us. So the aspect of fire management is also an issue, in that in the Bitterroot, as we often say, it's not if a certain area will burn, it's when. So when we have a large watershed, we have the ability to manage fire in such a way, at least attempt to manage fire in a way that does not negatively affect the watershed. So the ideal situation is to let fire play its natural role and break up the fuels on the landscape and hopefully get smaller patch sizes out of our fires than we have recently. In the 1970s, the Bitterroot was on the forefront of allowing fires to burn and not putting them out in the wilderness areas. Over the course of the last 30, 40 years, we've seen lots of fire, and we've seen the patch sizes slowly get smaller, which is ideal because less of the watershed is affected in any given year by fire. And because the fuels are getting treated more often, fire severity is generally lower, and therefore the less soil impacts and less erosion. So we have a general trend established where fire is breaking up the fuels in those wilderness watersheds and leading to smaller patch sizes and providing for a situation that when you look at the watersheds as a whole, and these are huge watersheds such as the Selway and the Bitterroot, that only a small percentage of them burns any given year, and the drainages that are affected are spotty, and they're not every drainage gets affected the same year with the same fire, and it leads to a better situation for salmon and anadromous fishes, any native fishes, because they tend to use those unburned watersheds as refuge, and from there the population dispersal happens back into those burned areas. Unburned watersheds as refuge, and from there the population dispersal happens back into those burned areas several years later, sometimes even quicker than that. So that patchy burning in the wilderness helps to desynchronize flows out of those areas and helps to minimize the amount of sediment coming any given year, spreads it out over the various drainages, and in the long run, wilderness areas have provided really the best water quality that the Forest Service can get off their lands that they administer. So wilderness areas and their management are extremely important, even though there's no timber coming off those areas. There's a lot of commodities that are not coming out of those areas. Wilderness is there for other reasons. But one of the results of keeping your hand out of the management is that we get better water quality.
Kind of segue into the non-wilderness areas.
Once you get outside of the wilderness areas and into managed areas, you run into a different scenario where there are many places where timber is an emphasis, and it's set forth in our forest plans. And over many years, that emphasis played out in the form of high levels of timber harvest in some areas where timber was available. And it led to a situation where the most fire-resistant trees were often the ones that were harvested, the larger trees. And this was done because the community and the social issues pointed us towards harvesting as an economic resource. It's hard to keep up the level of harvest needed to support communities and a large economic business in the Bitterroot because of the longer rotation times and the amount of terrain that is locked up in wilderness or wilderness study areas. There's just not a huge timber base here. One of the indirect effects of the logging was to start a lot of second growth stands that are brushier, tend to provide more fuel during fires than the older growth stands, which were thinned naturally by fire over time. And on a landscape level basis, the fuels were broken up. So with the change to ecosystem management in the 90s, the Forest Service started turning that equation around, and the logging was driven not as much by economic needs as it was by ecosystem benefits. So there are some benefits we can get from logging if we do it right. We can thin stands, we can leave a lot of mature trees, we can leave a situation that burns less intensively and has fewer soil and erosion results. As long as we follow up and we treat the fuels afterwards, after each logging event, in a modern scenario on the Bitterroot, those fuels, those fine fuels and logging slash are treated one way or another, either by piling and burning or broadcast burning. So logging can serve to break up fuels on the landscape and act to provide cover and shade for snowpack to help desynchronize the melt, to help prolong the snowpack, which doesn't happen in a high severity fire area. Even though there's more water produced in fire areas, burned areas, it all comes off at once due to the lack of shade and lack of wind protection. So we can see that there's a lot of issues to take into account when you are trying to come up with a prescription, a management prescription for a watershed emphasis. So
Yeah, Friends of the Bitterroot is a genuinely grassroots organization, about 26 years old, and it's non-hierarchical. We make decisions with a steering committee of 8 to 12 people, and our membership has been, well, we're over 300 now, and we started back about when it was about 87 or so, and same time as a lot of grassroots forest watch organizations in Montana. In the beginning, we basically decided that we would stick to good science and best available science, that we're not opposed to logging per se, and that we would use the available process that's provided by NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, to do what we could to keep forest management kind of on track. And we in the beginning had a couple of lawsuits over on the Beaverhead, primarily aimed at protecting water quality. Fisheries included one issue where we insisted that they start to analyze the impacts on biological corridors from their projects, which we won both of those lawsuits, and helped to kind of begin to see this analysis of impacts and biological corridors, which are very key. We're surrounded by wildlands here, and we still have all the wildlife that was here when Lewis and Clark came through. Then bison don't often wander through, but just about everything else does. Anyway, and then through the years we have appealed and litigated on the Bitterroot Forest. We appealed and litigated the burned area recovery project, which was enormous. In the beginning it was proposed 271 million board feet, as much as they'd logged in the previous about 8 years. And we also appealed and litigated the Middle East Fork timber sale. We've been called, we haven't appealed or litigated really any projects here or on nearby forests for the last 8 years. We believe we've been making some headway simply through doing our homework, offering comments to the draft and scoping, and I think that it took a while, but I think to actually make an impact on a Forest Service project, you need to not only have your facts right, but you need to have a credible threat of litigation. And once you satisfy those two requirements, then you can start getting them to modify projects, prior to the need of going to court. And we've been called all kinds of names, but a common one is that we're called obstructionists, and we don't see it that way. We believe we serve the role of a guardrail, which I guess obstructs vehicles from going into the canyon, and it protects lives, and that's what we see our role as being. If we were obstructionists, we would have been appealing and litigating everything that came our way. But at any rate, lately, you know, we've been involved with the Bitterroot Restoration Committee, the Valley County Resource Advisory Committee, and I don't know where it's going to go from here, because this latest Farm Bill forestry provisions basically does away with the public process. The public has largely been taken out of the any role, really meaningful role in managing public lands. The public's been removed in the interest of getting the cut out, timber cutting. So it's hard to tell where we go from here. They say that the courts are still open and the forest plans are still enforceable, but the only way we were ever, in order to win in court or win an appeal, you have to have your facts about impacts. And the way we could get those facts in the past is from the draft EA or draft EIS. Well, there's no more drafts. They're going to use this thing called a categorical exclusion, which is a very sketchy, minimal look before you leap. And so we would probably be largely unable to garner enough facts on the impacts to win in court. We'll see. You know, my feeling is that it's more than ever, it's going to be up to conscientious, professional, I call them ologists, but the specialists within the Forest Service, the hydrologists, geologists, whatever, to basically stand up and insist that the resource that they specialize in and hopefully care about is protected. In the past, it seems that they've been able, to a certain degree, to hide behind these citizen forest watch efforts and have some reasonable expectation that the resource that they hopefully care about would be protected. Well, we've been sidelined for the most part, and I don't know how many ologists are left. A lot of them have turned into prostitutes. There's a lot of specialists that just give the Forest Service what they want to hear in order to keep their job and reach retirement age. So anyway, going forward, we'll see what the role for Citizen Forest Watch is. It's largely been neutralized by the Farm Bill politics, basically. Well, politics hand in hand with the timber industry, who's managed to buy the politicians. Corporate influence is rampant everywhere.